Hello everyone, and welcome to today's National Soil Survey Center webinar. My name is Sean McVeigh, National Training Coordinator for the Soil Science Division and host for today's webinar, New York City Urban Soils Institute, Soils to the People. This webinar is being recorded and all participants join the webinar in listen-only mode. You receive the webinar audio through your device's speakers. There is no telephone dial-in. If you are having audio difficulties, please check the various ways your computer speakers may be muted or have their volume set low, including the speaker adjustments available in the Adobe Connect interface. You can maximize your webinar experience in Adobe Connect by shutting down VPN and any other programs that might compete for bandwidth. This includes email and Microsoft Outlook and instant messaging in Skype. Taking a look at our webinar room layout, Adobe Connect has content pods that include the feature presentation, chat, and Q&A pods. Use the 4-arrow icon in the featured presentation pod to enter and exit the full screen view as you choose. To submit a comment or question for me or our presenters, use the Q&A pod and type in your question. I'll handle technical difficulties the best I can while hosting the webinar and interact with our presenters to answer your questions during the verbal Q&A periods. I want to thank Rich Shaw for being here to support our webinar and introduce our co-presenter for this webinar. Rich, I'm going to turn the webinar over to you so you can introduce the topic and our presenters.
Thank you, Sean. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard K. Shaw, and I serve as the State Soil Scientist for New Jersey and New York. And I'm happy today to have the opportunity to talk about New York City Urban Soils Institute. And I'm here with the esteemed director, Tatiana Morin, and we're going to tell you a little bit about the USI, and Tatiana's going to start. So take it away.
Hi, everybody. So excited to be here. Thank you, NRCS, for the opportunity to talk about the USI today, its growth and its vision. So let's start off with why the USI exists. Our main message here is that we have a huge diversity of soils in the city, and they can serve many purposes and applications, and so these here are some of our focuses. We've noticed that interactions with soils have increased over the past few years, and there's several reasons for that. Climate change, more frequent storms, and this has kind of instigated more restoration efforts and resiliency work in the city. And then piggybacking on Plan YC, which was Bloomberg's initiative to build a sustainable city for New York. You've got zero waste, green infrastructure, a focus on stormwater management, urban agriculture, and this has really raised the need for interactions with soils, soil information, soil resources, and we realize that there's really no big clearinghouse for this kind of information. And as these questions and needs for services have increased, NRCS has always had a presence in New York City, but the demands have become very overwhelming. So we're looking at how do we focus these demands and offer them the resources that they need. So in the city, soils are really the apex of climate change and sustainable cities. So we'd like to emphasize the importance and the role that soils play in our everyday decisions. They're a humble and powerful resource, filtering our air, our water. They're responsible for growing our vegetation. They provide, the houses and immune system of the earth through their microbes, their fungi. They really provide our actual health and our sanity. They build communities. They ground our universe. Soils really unite. They're our common culture and our common language in the city. Soils really are the center of our urban universe. So because of all of this, we decided that, the Urban Soils Institute, an entity like this could really become a platform for all resources for soils. So about, before the 2000s, there was a vision shared by a few entities to really create an awareness and a presence for urban soils in the city.
Well, since we thought we knew a little bit about urban soils, and there were quite a few good universities and smart kids in New York City, we were thinking that why shouldn't New York City be the center for teaching and research of urban soils?
So about 3 years ago, the Soil and Water Conservation District of New York City, the NRCS, Gaia Institute, and Brooklyn College formed a partnership to push this vision through. We had a launch in 2014 during the release and workshop that celebrated the completion of the initial soil survey and its availability on the web soil survey and the mobile app. And we got phenomenal feedback from that day. It was really kind of family-like, and people really appreciated the ideas. So we knew we had a really good thing going here. So we decided to, take it back to the office and really think about it, and we designed it to operate out of 5 divisions. It would be a clearinghouse that could serve the resource needs for all soil-related information, provide soil testing, interpretation, other technical services, and coordinate soil-based research for the city. So we did that through soil testing and technical services, education outreach, a data depository, research, and international collaboration. And we'll tell you a little bit more about all those divisions as we go forward. So as we've been growing over these past 3 years, it's been extremely evident that the real essence of the USI's function is to be this platform. So we've noticed that it's been used kind of like as that sponge, that neutral zone for connecting and interfacing entities from different disciplines, even as a communication conduit for government agencies and their sister agencies. So it's really been really interesting to see how people can start communicating and learn about soils by exercising through this platform. So our mission for the USI is to advance the scientific understanding and promote sustainable use of urban soils through research, education, conservation, and restoration in community. And we do all that through partnerships, resource sharing, and coordination of programs. So collaboration is our big push in our mission.
Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about the Urban Soils Institute and USDA NRCS. I served as the project leader for the New York City Soil Survey for about 10 years, and now I get to provide technical soil services to the city. A little bit of history. Back in 1995, which, if my math is correct, about 22 years ago, it was really the Soil Conservation District realized the value of soil survey. And our agency had completed a soil survey before then, one for Central Park in the early 1980s, in cooperation with Cornell. But in 1995, they partnered with NRCS and Cornell, and they wanted to establish not just a survey, but a multifaceted program for New York City. So this program included, not just one soil survey, but multiple soil surveys and soil-related research projects, on-site investigations, trainings, workshops. We held a couple of conferences, both national and international, outreach, volunteer and internship opportunities. And really the idea was not just to conduct a survey and that be the end of it, but really to help to try and raise awareness of soil science in the city and become an accepted part of the urban environmental community there. So we did complete a whole suite of surveys, 4 high-intensity or Order 1 surveys, where we mapped relatively small parcels to high detail, lot size, minimum size delineation. We also completed a citywide survey at a 1 inch to the mile scale. But probably the most important objective was to cover the city in more detail and have a product available on web soil survey. So we did conduct the initial 1 to 12,000 scale. I believe that went online in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. And we did have quite a few soil survey-related special projects. Ended up in a great deal of lab data for the city. Last time we counted, there were 118 petons. And a lot of the projects looked at trace metals, atmospheric additions, urban background levels, correlation with artifact content. We also looked at infiltration and land use. Stormwater management is a very important application of soil surveying in urban areas. We wanted to get the hydrologic soil groups right and the remainder of the hydrologic data. And with all the lab data we had, we were able to calculate soil organic carbon stocks for the city as well. So we did on-site investigations for a wide range of purposes and partners. Did educational and outreach events. Like I said, some regional, national, international conferences, a lot of collaboration. We even had a really wonderful project in soil art, which the Urban Soils Institute is really picking up on nowadays. And we had a pretty impressive list of cooperators, city, state, national agencies, universities, nonprofits, some in the private sector. And maybe we were somewhat successful at raising awareness of soils in New York City, but more likely it's just that the applications of soil science have really grown exponentially recently. And the soil-related needs in the city are just greater than one entity even the NRCS can handle. So we got our soil-related partners to combine forces to form this Urban Soils Institute. It was the New York City Soil and Water Conservation District with the Executive Director Shino Tanakawa, the Gaia Institute, who had coupled ecological engineering with environmental restoration for over 30 years in the city, a lot of great experience, and Brooklyn College with Joshua Chang from the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences. And we were lucky to find a pretty good director for our new institute, Tatiana, who had her start with the New York City Soil and Water Conservation District. So what does NRCS provide to the Urban Soils Institute? Well, we did provide quite a bit of education and outreach and partnerships, but really the Urban Soils Institute has taken the lead on that front nowadays. But I think more importantly what the NRCS provides is really the soil science expertise, particularly characterization, genesis, and classification, mapping, the field aspects of soil science. We also provided the connections in the soil science community, both national and international. But what I really want to talk about was what I think is most important of all, the knowledge of local soil conditions to something like this, built around our extensive field experience in the city. The term urban soil probably brings to mind a typical image in most people's minds of a contaminated, compacted soil with mixed layers and colors. And there are probably some global similarities in urban soils, but the fact is that soils in urban areas are actually very diverse, and each city has its own soil pattern. Okay, it's affected by geography and geology and land use history and disturbance, different types of disturbance, and management practices. And as an example, let's look at New York City. It's got a pretty complex geologic and geomorphic setting, 3 physiographic provinces, all blanketed by a variety of glacial materials, some till, a terminal moraine, and an outwash plain. It's got some post-glacial deposits. It's all topped off by anthropogenic disturbance. And if you look at the history, it was settled by the Dutch in the 1600s. The geography, 3 islands and 1 peninsula left limited room for expansion. And as a result, there was extensive filling of wetlands and expansion of the shoreline, which the Dutch were pretty good at. And a lot of it was done with waste materials. And this became parent materials for soil formation, and that's really reflected in what we found in the soil survey, the major types of soil in the city. So just to talk a little bit about the soil survey methods, we differentiated the soils formed in naturally deposited materials, things like glacial till, outwash, and alluvium, or what you would call the native or the natural soils, from those formed in what we now like to call human-altered or human-transported materials, or the fill soils. And we identified 38 different soil series in the natural materials or native soils, and 32 in the fill soils. Soils in a series with the same parent material, particle size, drainage class, and same sequence of horizons. So if you were to look at citywide, the distribution of those different types, we found that about 63% of the city is impervious surfaces, or what is usually called field soils. About 28% are the fill soils, and about 9% are the native or natural soils. okay, and about 1% non-soil areas. And another way of looking at this would be placing the soils in New York City in what you might call an anthroposequence, or a continuum of human disturbance, okay, with the native or natural soils at one end, those soils that are affected indirectly by the human environment, by the urban environment, maybe atmospheric deposition of some different types of materials and effects of invasives. And at the other end of the spectrum would be the soils that are formed in either all artifactual or human processed materials, or the sealed soils. Okay. And there's a very wide range in properties for these soils, a wide range in physical properties and chemical properties and mineralogic properties, ranging from the native soils that are acid and low fertility, and the soils that are loaded with artifacts that are very calcareous, with elevated trace metals, elevated black carbon contents, often compacted. And the suitabilities and limitations of these soils for different applications are very variable as well. Okay. So what can we get from an urban soil survey? It's really all about a soil inventory. What types of soils are out there and what are they good for? What are their physical, chemical, mineralogical properties? As an example, if we wanted to restore or vegetate these soils, will native plants do well in all these soils? And that also brings to mind, what are the research needs for these soils? So really, it's all about knowing the local soils and their distribution. We're able to establish the soil distribution patterns and the extent in some of the biodiversity in New York City, the soils in New York City. So here's some figures for the amount of land covered by the different soil types. The fill soils are in green and native soils are in blue. And there's a map showing the geographical extent as well. The fill soils are in the light green, the native soils are in blue, and the sealed surfaces are in gray. And you see a lot of the open space that runs along the Thermal Moraine in New York City. And like I said, from the lab data, we were able to assess soil organic carbon stocks in the city, okay, for both the individual soil types. Fill soils are in green, the native soils are in blue. And we did have actually a few dozen data points for the sealed soils, which are in gray. And we've got the average values, and you compare them to other land uses in the surrounding areas. Okay. And along with the knowledge of local soils comes ideas on local research needs. Okay? Among them, there are some new geophysical methods that have been proposed for urban soil survey. Will these work in New York City? Can we provide better interpretations for our important applications of soil survey? Are there better methods of assessing contaminant problems? How about black carbon and calcium carbonate? What are their roles in carbon sequestration, in pedogenesis, in ecology? And the sealed soils that make up 63% of the land area. What's important about them? Should we consider mapping those? And so it's really all about ecosystem service delivery and improving the quality of life in the urban environment. Okay, and I'll turn it back over to Tatiana now.
Okay, so going into the Soil and Testing and Technical Services Division of the USI, we have a lab where we can test locally people's soils. We offer on-site technical assistance, soil survey through the NRCS, and obviously workshops and urban soil course development and data interpretation. So this service attracts gardeners and researchers, educational campaigns, advocates, stewards, agencies, industries, you name it. So our interaction with customers and with people in the city is really significant through the soil testing lab. It's a way for the home gardener to realize that they do have access to their soils and they can learn something about them. So we offer a lot of testing. However, at this particular moment, we're not in full swing operations because we have some transitions that we're going through, and we're building out the USI a bit more this year. So we'll get into that further on in the webinar. What is really evident is that our requests that come in demand for on-site assistance. People love it when we come to their garden or their compost project area or their backyard or their rooftop. For them, it gives them more of a personal approach to understanding the soils, but it works both ways. For us, it's a much more useful way to understand the diversity of soils and the way people interact with them in the city. So this has been a very useful activity for the USI. And urban ag being this new movement, well, not so new, but relatively new since the 70s and 80s in the city, New York City has grown to be the largest urban ag system in the United States, something I learned this year. We have about 600 community gardens that are managed by the city, about 700 that are privately owned or owned by other entities or supervised by other entities. And out of the green infrastructure gardens that were put in for stormwater management, about 900 of those are growing food as well. So urban ag has been on the rise, and is just gaining more and more momentum with every year. So the need for soil testing and soil education is growing exponentially, as Rich said. So why urban ag? Well, urban ag really kind of acts as green infrastructure. It's a way to restore our soils, expose our soils when they were once looked at as waste. And it increases evapotranspiration in the city, connects biocorridors, reduces heat island effect, and of course it brings people together through food. It grows communities, which strengthens, also the need and the understanding that soils have a really vital place in our lifestyle in New York City. So there's different ways we work with urban ag. We do soil testing, we assist and do some education, we offer a lot of workshops, we do a lot of cabling events to get the information out there, to let people know that soil information is accessible to them. We're creating an urban ag resource roadmap, so basically a way for people to navigate through all the different programs and resources that are offered for urban ag so that they don't have to do all of that search on their own. We build a connection with existing farmers and organizations and other experts and entities and disciplines that are working with urban ag and soils. And of course, our annual Urban Soil Symposium, which is basically like a platform bringing all these different disciplines together, a place where people can get their questions answered and raise interests and concerns and research potential. So when you think about urban ag in the city, it's kind of like a mentality. There's a boundary between New York City and outside of New York City. In some ways, that's a physical boundary, that we have rivers that separate us from the mainland. But in other respects, it's just a mentality. We've got soils on both sides of the boundaries, and we are building new food systems in both the city and outside the city. And what we have in the city is small-scale cooperative farming, which has become quite popular outside the city as well. So there's a really important need to understand that, although we have specific issues with urban soils in the city, we still can communicate with other experiences and people outside of the city. So that leads us to something we're working on now, is to develop a liaison for urban and rural community-supported farms. This is a way to link community-sized farming in rural areas inside and outside of the city, a way to share resources. When you think about New York City, space is limited, so it's a really raw opportunity right now to kind of get in there and work with people to understand that soil conservation is really important and building soil health is really important in sustaining urban agriculture in the city. And that same kind of resource information sharing can be worked on inside and outside the city. So we're thinking of how we can create a partnership where we can share resources, whether that's training farm staff or sharing different kinds of compost, or using an urban farm to support a farmer's market and they partner with a farm outside of the city to grow maybe a higher maintenance crop. So I think there's a lot of potential for relationships to be built between the city and outside of the city. So another huge focus for the USI is the education and outreach component. So it's one thing to answer questions when they come in about soils and to offer the services, but what's really crucial is to be able to provide the accessible and robust education for the common denominator in the city. That is a sustainable way to retain information within the city. And we do that through building workshops. So we offer them publicly, we offer them on-site with our partners, and it's a way for them to understand a little bit more about how urban soils behave in the city and how we interact with them. So it's really offering, accessible information to all disciplines in the city. So we do, as I said before, a lot of hands-on workshops, and we travel all over the city, all boroughs, and take on requests and do as much as we have the resources to do. And that demand is growing really fast, more than we can keep up with. And then we have the research end of things. So we have a division of the USI that's building on creating a research agenda for urban soils. And there are several avenues for this, mapping lead in soils and other contaminants as people begin to use soils more, understanding the exposure and health risk associated with gardening and urban farming, to be able to mitigate strategies and remediation techniques, to reduce the bioavailability of contaminants and do bioremediation, support green infrastructure for soils research, and work with compost. So there's a lot of complex things that we can look at when it comes to interacting with soils in the city. There's a lot we know and we can work off of, but there's a lot that we don't know. So to have that conversation with different entities, people that are on the ground, people that are doing the research, and the experts, and the people that are new to soils, so that we can understand what the questions are, where the needs are, and what the research questions should be to really address the needs in the city. So to do that, we've realized that, urban soils are very specific to New York City, but we also have urban soils in all other urban areas of the world. So we've really worked hard at creating partnerships outside of New York City, not only so that we can learn from experts outside the city, but also so that we can bring that information back home and share it with New York. So this year, after our last symposium and after our second symposium, November of 2017, we established the USI's core research group. So Rich Shaw and Paul Manklitz are the chairs of this research group, and Mahadib, a postdoc from France, is our coordinator for this research group, and we're working on developing our research agenda. And we're doing that through our partnerships, through soliciting needs from the public, and developing those research needs in a priority list. And we've established a collaborative research network for the first time after the symposium. And the members of this group are local, international, national experts and practitioners in various fields. So the benefit to us there is that we have a real good group of people that have been working in urban soils for many years, and practitioners. And it's a way for us to really understand how we build standards and how we approach urban soils and give people valuable and quality information so that it becomes useful to the public. Okay. So here is just, this is definitely not an exhaustive list, but just kind of like a good view of some of the partners and people that have come to us interested in the Urban Soils Institute and have asked for our assistance or services or have wanted to work with us in some way, or the people we've reached out to. So we've got, government and non-government, academic, nonprofit, community organization advocates. And this is the part that gets really interesting for me, at least. This is all the stuff we're working on this year. We are only 3 years young, so a lot of what we were envisioning has been in the development process for a long time. And through our symposiums, we've made some great partnerships and great connections and have really kind of created a presence in the city. And we are really become an entity that is responding to the needs and the demands from the public. So in doing so, we've kind of refocused some of our efforts. And one of the things that I just mentioned before was creating a scientific collaborative research network and a collaborative development group. So that's really a way for us to reach out to more people by getting more people working with us. There's a lot of really wonderful entities out there in the city that do work with soils either directly or indirectly. And for them to all come and use their network and their outreach to really kind of unify all the great programs that are out there, this is a really great way to do that. We are also working on creating resource hubs throughout the city. So right now we're looking at Greenwood Cemetery, Governor's Island, and Floyd Bennett Field, and McCann Park. So again, a way to have a physical presence in the boroughs of New York City so that people can feel that they have something in their own backyard. They can come get their questions answered, they get their soil tested, they have access in a good proximity to their home, a place to go get a workshop, get some information and courses on soils, offer school programming. We're working on developing a soils museum, field courses, a way for people to really participate on the hands-on activities with soils. So to focus a little bit more on Greenwood Cemetery, this is something that's in the pipeline for this year. We're working hard on developing what we are calling the Soil Art Museum. And this is, again, a way to invite interaction with soils where it might not be accessible or people might not know that they can interact with soils like this in the city. It would really offer them a window into the physical sense of the soil, so its texture, its color, its smell, to be able to hear its heartbeat, but then to also explore it on a scientific level, to understand its role and how it behaves in the city, understand its, how it acts as a buffer to our health, and to be able to look at it through different nuances. And art really helps to do that. It gives it a real visual impact. It makes it personal, and yet you can also look at the different scientific layers to soils. We're also going to explore soil philosophy, soil history, soil ethics, and soil symbolism, and that also leads us to discovering the sociological aspects of soils and how the impression has changed in the city over time. It's also a great venue to do soils research. The NRCS crew is going in there to do some soil mapping, also laying down a great foundation to do more soils research in terms of urban soils and their role in climate change and soil development, exploring the different effects of turf management and returning native flora. And of course, since it's a park, it's a cemetery that's looking to, it's a 400-acre space, so they're looking to really embrace the community and let them use the space as a learning tool. They have wildlife inventories. They're bringing back some native plants, and they're experimenting with perhaps doing some edible foraging. And so for the Urban Soils Institute to have a presence there and to be able to offer the workshops and the field courses with soils and develop an urban soils curriculum out of there is a really great way to work with different partners and really have the public exposed to a real soil experience. So we're really looking forward to this partnership with Greenwood. So do check back with us to see how that's developing. This summer is what the target is for that. We are also super excited to announce the USI Art Extension Service that we created this year after the symposium as well. This was a seed that was planted actually by Rich Shaw and Margaret Boozer when they got together and put soil and art together at the Museum of Arts and Design. And since then, Margaret's mission has really been to use her soil art as a way to work with soil scientists and really express soil research and soil issues to a wider audience. So art has become a really powerful way, a really useful language to work between soil and art and different disciplines. It creates a larger and diverse audience and participation. So the Art Extension Service is not only going to be basically the cornerstone to how the Soil Art Museum gets put together, but also it will become a service that will be available to scientists and to artists. So a way that advocacy can be informed by science, how art can be informed by science, and how science can reach a large and diverse audience through art. So we will be working on launching that this year. And this is just, I couldn't help myself, I put some of these pictures in there because, you know, it reaches down to all levels. The kids get really involved, and it's visual, it's tangible, as soils are already. So to add that art layer is easy. And when you think about the symbolism of soil in the past and in the present, and what soils have meant to people, it's either meant war or it's meant safety. It has a lot of cultural impacts. And then, you know, looking at soil like a stained glass window, it has different nuances and different beauties to it as well. So this is just some more example. We had a soil symposium in November, like I said, and we had a lot of the people that came to the symposium as an audience. They were invited to also bring soil art and express it there and put it on display. So it was a great way for people really to get into it. It became quite a hit at the symposium. So we're also working on creating a data depository, and this is something that we wanted to do initially when we started the symposium. It's a pretty hefty dream, but it'll be really, really great when it gets started. The idea behind this data depository is to have an interactive map of all soil data and resources. So whether that's literature or a monitoring site or a soil boring, it'll all be in one map. And it's a great way for agencies to communicate their data, for other organizations to see what other people are doing, and for each other to learn from their trials and tribulations, and to also be able to offer data for research. So it's a great way to organize and collaborate and centralize the data that will become a tool for everybody. So we are working on launching that this year as well, and we'll have several stakeholder workshops to figure out everybody's uses and needs for such a database. Other things we're working on as well, soil quality certificate. So as we, you know, improve and work with urban ag more, and we deal with contamination in the city, people, what we've learned, have become really used to just getting bags of soil from Home Depot or from other commercial stores. And we have a great resource in the city to rework our soils or to use clean soils in our gardens and our parks and our vacant lots. So to do a soil quality certificate, it would be basically to create a grading system and a standard way of looking at soils, so that when we do offer mixes to the customers, that they understand what that soil is, the parameters of that soil, and its use for their application. So not only does it provide them an insight into soils and their parameters, but also offers them, you know, an appetizer to learn how they can learn about soils more and what they're capable of in the city. So that leads us to the soil health certificate. So we have a lot of farmers that test their soils at the lab, and they don't let their customers really know about that. So we thought, you know, at a farmer's market, what a great way for people to understand that food comes from soil. And one way of doing that is to offer them a soil health certificate. So it's kind of like a nutritional label. It will let you know that your kale was grown in the pH of 7, there was no contamination found in the soil. It shows that the farmer's doing their due diligence and responsibility of making sure that the soils are safe for growing vegetables for their produce that they sell to the farmer's market, and a way for the consumer to understand the profound role and importance of understanding what kind of soil the food came from. So again, it's more building of an educational and awareness kind of thing. I'll get to the soil grading in a minute at the next slide. We have a great opportunity to work with the New York City Clean Soils Bank, which is coming out of the Mayor's Office of Environmental Remediation. They have a program where they excavate pure native clean sediments out of New York City during real estate transactions or construction activities. They screen it, they test it 100 times over, They prove that it's clean, and this sediment that used to get exported out of the city for billions of dollars can now have a new life and be upcycled and reused in the city. The great thing is that as we are in the need for more clean soils in the city, when mixed with organic amendments such as compost, we have a lot of awesome compost operations happening in the city. Our program that we're working on is to test these composts, grade these composts, and use them as mixes with this sediment, this parent material, and to be able to distribute it to end users, whether it's your gardener or your rooftop farmer or a restorer of a vacant lot or park. And what we do is we also create different grades and classes for these soil mixes so that the customer's sure of what kind of soil they're getting, what its best use is, and so there'll be a big educational program that will go with it. This has gained a lot of interest, and I think the demand was high already yesterday. So we will not lose time, and we'll be working on that this year. We have a few sites that we are working on to push this program out of, and we'll keep you posted on that. Compost is a really big thing in the city, especially since the city's working on zero waste by 2030, I think it is. And a lot of these compost entities, these operations have amazing processes, and they have great sourcing for their compost, but they not all of them have a consistent end user for their compost. So if we're working with them to understand some of their questions, some of their research questions in their compost development, but also to help them understand where compost can be used in the city, what kind of amendments are they useful for, and to be able to give them kind of that information so that we can build out a good end use for compost in the city. Looking into the future, through some of our international collaboration, we've made a strong relationship with Rudan University, which is an international university in Moscow. And we've worked on developing a summer school with them last year, and we're hosting another one with them this year in Moscow. And the idea behind this is it invites students and experts and lecturers from all over the world to get together for 2 weeks. And it's really intensive course. We go through skill building, training, lectures, workshops, and we end the summer school with a week-long field trip to different areas to look at different soils. It's a really rich experience for people to get some hands-on skills that they don't necessarily get at home, and a way to build connections and collaborations right from the get-go. So, and if anybody has a visa available, we're welcoming you to this summer school this year. If you can't make it this year, please do join us next year. There'll also be a conference there this year that we're part of. And looking into the future for New York City this year, we're having our 3rd annual Urban Soil Symposium. Right now we're looking at the dates of November 29th and 30th, but those are not confirmed, so you can stay posted about that. Last year, our symposium was a little bit bigger since it was our 2nd one. We had great feedback. The success of these symposiums is that it really has become a platform where all different disciplines and backgrounds get together, and it's very interactive. It's not just lecture-based, it's workshop-based and conversation-based, so everybody gets to know each other and all the questions get to be asked, and it's really effective. So please do think about coming or save the date for our symposium this year. And I think that's all.
Okay.
So if you are curious about getting in touch with us, this is our contact information. Our website's really easy. It's www.usi.nyc. And we'll do our best to keep everything updated. Thank you so much for your time and for listening. And we do encourage feedback, questions, recommendations, you name it. The Institute is for the people, by the people. So the more conversation, collaboration, that is our mission, to bring soils to the people all together. So.
Excellent presentation. There's so much information in there. I'll just remind people to put your question in the Q&A pod, and we had several questions come in already, so let's go ahead and get started on those. The first one is from Kurt. Under the New York City program, who pays for the testing of soil, for instance, lead testing? Is this funded through the Institute?
So it depends what kind of testing you're talking about. If it's people sending samples to the lab, we have a very low fee. For XRF screening, for example, people pay $10 and they get their sample XRF, and then we send back the results and offer one-on-one conversation with them if they would need help understanding what their soil test results mean. If we do an event, or if a community garden has requested us to come and do testing at their site, we usually do those for free unless there is a grant in place where both entities benefit from the grant. Then we can do it for a small fee, and we get a lot done that way as well. Is that it?
It sounds like a lot of user fees then.
Yes.
Okay. From Kome, how affordable is food from a rooftop gardens compared to regular farms or gardens, and how are you funded?
So we don't actually do the rooftop gardening. We support them by hosting soil workshops there so that they can offer that to their consumers and to their farmers. So we help them with the soil side of things. As for selling the products, they have a connection with the farmers market, or they sell directly from the rooftop, or they work through an entity called Grow NYC from the mayor's office that helps stimulate food products selling in the city. Compared to your regular grocery store, it's probably on par, if not less, depending if you're buying it from the market or from the rooftop itself.
All right, there's another question from FG. It says, looking at the list of uses and scale of management, most of these are site-specific, on-site type investigations. So what level of mapping intensity is the survey in New York City?
The one that's on Web Soil Survey is a 1 to 12,000 scale. So the minimum size delineation is about 1.5 acres. And yeah, I mean, it's designed mostly for the big contiguous open spaces. So once you get into the smaller lot sizes, yeah, you really need to do the on-site investigations for those. I hope that answered the question.
So would you say that was an order 1 or an order 2 survey, or a hybrid of the two?
It certainly wasn't order 1, the 1 to 12,000, no. Some of the earlier surveys were order 1, but not the 1 to 12,000, no.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and ask a question. So you had a lot of research needs listed there. Have any of those research needs resulted in creating new urban soil interpretations?
We're working on them.
Can you talk about some of those that show promise?
I've actually probably been working on this for a while, but we're thinking of just adapting the land capability class. That's sort of a first cut for urban agriculture. Maybe add the artifact content as well, and you know, it would be something, like I said, people could use as a first cut for suitability for urban agriculture. But it's something that would have to be followed up by an on-site investigation for metals and other contaminants. And you know, thinking about some green infrastructure or stormwater management in TERPs. And I guess one of the ideas I had was that I thought there might be some value in calculating sort of potential water storage in various soil types in the city. You know, a lot of people are interested in volumes, and I think that, you know, with the data we've got in a database, we could probably calculate some of that.
There actually is another question in the Q&A from Kurt about stormwater runoff, and it ties into, has there been any research on urban soil compaction as it relates to stormwater runoff? And if so, how have local landowners made soil-based changes to reduce stormwater runoff?
Well, I guess, I mean, we're always trying to raise the awareness of compaction. I don't know that we've actually, we did a study with land use and infiltration, and pretty much used the results of that to for our hydrologic soil groups for our different map units, and some of the map units were based on land use.
I think also as green infrastructure has been pushed through in the city by the New York City's Plan YC plan, the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, who's been kind of leading green infrastructure in the city, has put a little bit more focus on soils. Before, they used to just kind of put in a bioswale where it was considered to be most useful, and then they started to look more at the soils and their compaction and depth to water table and to bedrock. And so I think the focus for and the need for soils information has become a lot more intensive.
All right, there's another question dealing with heavy metals, and I know you talked about using the XRF to scan for lead content, but what about other heavy metals? Is it kind of a suite of analyses that the XRF gives?
Oh yeah, you can get maybe 15, 20 to 30 different trace metals with the XRF, and yes, some of the work we did with the artifacts, we tried to correlate artifact type and content with a bunch of different trace metals and soils, and we did find some that you could make some generalizations that as artifact content increases, trace metal content increases, and we actually found that of all the different artifact types, actually it was bricks that correlated the highest with most of the different trace metals. And it's probably not because there are a lot of trace metals in the bricks, but when you find bricks in the soils, usually there's the other construction debris, the wood and the metal that's got the lead and the other trace metals associated with it. So.
And I guess just a follow-up question on that, has any of this research and measurement of heavy metals, have you thought about, are the recommended limits on these contaminants, do they need to be changed, or can they be changed?
Yeah, you don't know that's, I think that's beyond the scope of our work in the city, I think what we're trying to do, at least from the soil survey perspective, is make generalizations about soil properties and contaminant levels. The health and safety is really sort of beyond the scope of what we're doing. Dr. Chang over at Brooklyn College is looking at a lot of ways of testing bioavailability of contaminants, and particularly lead and arsenic, and is working on maybe a field assessment of bioavailability. So I guess that's as close as we're getting to the whole, setting cleanup standards or limits of trace metals in urban agriculture.
I think that's a big focus of ours in terms of research, because the variability and the intensity of uses of soils in the city can be so heterogeneous. So that's why when we do our site assessments and we do soil testing, our preference is to go to people's gardens or the site where they're getting the soil tested, because then you get a real good scope and idea of what kind of soils you're dealing with and the people that you're working with and who's going to essentially be using these soils. And that changes, and that it can be so different everywhere. So to develop that knowledge and that inventory and understand the needs is really the groundwork for understanding how to work on interpreting heavy metals and soils in terms of people's health risks in the city.
There's a question from Richard in the Q&A. It says, any work in the coastal areas looking at restoration?
Not as specifically.
No, probably not us specifically, but the New York City Parks is doing a lot of tidal marsh restoration, and we get asked to help them on occasion with some of those projects.
Another question on urban ag is, so I mean, your picture showed a lot of vegetables, spices, herbs, that kind of thing, but any small animal agriculture in the area?
The only thing that I'm aware of that is allowed right now is chickens. So there are some places, some urban farms that have chickens and some community gardens that have chickens. So they, some places do sell eggs, but other than that, that's not other, unless somebody else in the audience knows, I'm not aware of other small animals like rabbits or anything being allowed as a farming agricultural thing, which is another reason why we thought that building a partnership between urban farms and upstate farms would be a great thing, because working together, you can fulfill the farmers market's needs. We are slightly limited in New York City about what we can produce, but if we have a partner upstate, then we can fulfill basically the food needs of the markets and the food system.
Okay, Rich, you mentioned the carbon levels in the city, and I wonder if you can make any statements about the differences between urban carbon sequestration and carbon stocks there and carbon stocks in other non-urban areas.
Yeah, I think that recently there's been a whole lot more research coming out on urban carbon stocks, and I think the numbers are pretty surprising to a lot of people because in the past really wasn't considered that there was that much carbon, organic carbon in urban areas. But I think a lot of it is, there's a lot of it in the form of black carbon, just things like asphalt and coal ash, and I think the numbers can really be incredibly high. And there's also the matter of the inorganic carbon that's being stored in a lot of these soils. Yeah, I just think that there's a whole lot more carbon in those areas than people had thought, and it's just interesting to see all the numbers coming out lately.
Well, it looks like we've exhausted our questions. So thank you to Tatiana and Rich for your time and effort to make this presentation, and thanks to all the participants for joining in. We had nearly 100 people join today's webinar. The on-demand recording of this webinar will be available on the National Soil Survey Center YouTube channel within a few days, so feel free to let your colleagues know about this training opportunity. This concludes our webinar presentation.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.